plumbed the depths of that hole, you realise just how dire the situation was. They were spending money they didn't have. They were making commitments on the never, and they've left us in a terrible situation and some hard decisions. I guess it wouldn't have been, I know it wouldn't have been easy around that cabinet table when they decided to cut the winter fuel allowance or to only make it available to pensioners on pension credit, but things have to give.
Isn't it completely cynical that you weren't honest with the public during the general election when we knew there'd be a massive fiscal black hole? We all knew that there would be one. Why were you not open with pensioners before then?
The people who weren't honest with the public were the Conservative government who were spending the money without having it and not revealing it. It wasn't, this 22 billion, even the OBR themselves have said today, like, hold on a second, we didn't know about this until last week. It raises serious questions for the last government on why they didn't tell the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is meant to monitor government spending, government budgets. They didn't know about it. So when Rachel Reeves went in 3 weeks ago, we're only 3 weeks into this government, she asked for an audit. She got the audit. The audit shows we spent 22 billion in this year we don't have. Now that means, unfortunately, there has to be some cuts in public services, some cuts to projects, as you discussed earlier with Darren Jones. But it also means some kind of a reset as well. We've seen that on public sector pay, on the junior doctors, on the teachers and nurses in England will get pay rises they need, because the cost of not settling these pay rises could be disastrous.
And we may come to that. Linda, you.
So she essentially announced about £5.5 billion worth of cuts and extending things like the windfall tax in order to cover all but 16
on oil and gas companies.
That's right. So now that's up to. So I think this particular choice of taking away universal credit, which is what the winter allowance was, that adds about, I think it saves about £1.5 billion. And I think what we're going to find is people will judge them on whether or not this meets with their criteria of fairness. So, is it fair to have the least well-off pensioners receive this? If you're a better-off pensioner, would it be better for the £1.5 billion to go and stabilise the debt? And I think that's a decision everyone needs to assess. And let me just say, we're going to have tons of these coming up. And so I think this one is... I would say there's a marker here, but I think the general principle where they're trying to protect, working people, trying to increase fairness. I think all of these principles are right, but the problem is always when you have to make these decisions, are these the decisions to be made today? Should this have been a decision to you wait until the budget comes out, the OBR does their full assessment? I think that's another point to think about.
But Linda, if we're talking about fairness, why didn't the Labour now government during the election just say, we're going to scrap the triple lock?
I think it's because a lot of pensioners, I think you mentioned this earlier in a conversation with Darren Jones, a lot of pensioners do struggle. And I think even those who are slightly, better off, I think when you are subject to high inflation and what have you, the pension triple lock is intended to protect incomes for people who are no longer working. So if inflation, remember, peaked at 11.1%, if you didn't have a protection in terms of the growth of your pension, you'd be much, much worse off. So there is a high degree, I think, of fairness there, and which is why, coming back to your listener's question, why this decision? I think this is one, put it on the list and see how the other decisions pan out.
I'll come back to you in a second, Torcuil. Lord Pickles.
Do you know, I was on a committee that looked at doing exactly this. The advice that we were given, and I assume the figure they got can't be a netted figure, is that there are a lot of people who don't claim pensioner credit, who should have pensioner credit, and a lot of work needs to go in order to identify those people. The advice that we were given at that time, and things may have changed now, but I suspect they haven't, is that actually it's cheaper to continue paying the winter fuel allowance than going through the elaborate process of trying to identify people who should have applied. Now, there are benefit uptakes, a number of campaigns to try and encourage people to do that. But that's the essential dilemma. And I aren't saying this is a wrong thing to do, because clearly it doesn't make sense to give pensioner credit to the King or to myself. It makes sense to target. But I think the substantive point is that to be able to target that is going to be actually quite expensive, and just throwing the money out in terms of winter fuel allowance is actually a cheaper way of doing it than going through the rather elaborate means test.
Lord Pickles, did you feel a little bit embarrassed when you heard the Chancellor Rachel Reeves in the Commons this afternoon absolutely banging the previous Conservative government to rights? I mean, it was a prosecution on the part of the Chancellor. Did you not feel a little bit uncomfortable and embarrassed about the country, the state of the country that your party has left it in?
I felt a bit nostalgic. I felt like I was listening to George Osborne. I thought that it had changed. We aren't criticising the past government for not repairing the roof when the sun was shining. We've now moved to the foundations. They've now told the world that the Conservative Party has left in this dire strait. It doesn't matter a jot that those figures were there, they were open, they were available. You can't hide things from the Office of Public Responsibility. And you get a succession of Labour MPs standing up. I'm really sorry that my school isn't going to be built. I'm really sorry my hospital isn't going to be built. But I blame the Tories. It's theatre. It might work. But the business of government is about taking decisions. They've taken a decision with regard to the doctors. They've taken a decision with regard. And all these things have to be paid for. What they're essentially saying is, we don't like the situation that's been left to us because there are lots of things that we want to do, and we've now got to make difficult decisions. Welcome to government.
Kat.
Yeah, so just on the discrepancy between the winter fuel allowance and the triple lock, I think the main distinguishing feature is that one was a manifesto commitment and the other wasn't. And the reason I think why the triple lock was a manifesto commitment is because, we only have to go back a few weeks in our memory, although it does feel like a long time ago. The campaign that Labour ran was a very, very cautious one. I think probably rightly. I think they knew that any wedge that was open between them and the Tories would have been rammed further open. And, frankly, you don't win elections by saying you're going to take money away from pensioners. So, that there is a kind of political, realpolitik play here. They couldn't, therefore, kind of row back on that immediately. It may well be that at some point in the next few years we talk about it as perhaps a future issue that comes up, because it does feel, although I take what Linda says about it being a kind of issue of fairness, and there are clearly a lot of pensioners who aren't well off and will struggle now with this winter fuel allowance being removed. But there are also a lot of very young people, working people, graduates who are paying a lot of tax and so on, who are not seeing the benefits, who never have this sort of 10%, 8% pay rise effectively every year that pensioners have been having.
But what does it do to trust in politics, though? I mean, the very fact, you're right, I understand politically it would have been political suicide to come out and say that they're going to abandon the triple lock. But we knew something was going to happen. And the very first thing that they're doing is announcing that they're going to scrap, they're going to means test the winter fuel allowance. I mean, if you're a pensioner sitting there thinking, I voted for this government in good faith, they told me that they would be honest and they would have integrity, they've sold me down the river.
I mean, I'm sure some people will feel like that, but as Lord Pickles has just said, these are political choices, and the sort of, bluntly put, pensioners tend to vote more for Conservatives than for Labour, so it's probably a hit that Labour can accept.
They can be sacrificed. Torcuil Crichton.
Well, just to pick up on the theme that's...
Sorry, that was a bit emotive language. Yeah. Go on, Torcuil.
Just to pick up on that theme that Eric picked, that everyone had as well, and Linda picked up on about fairness. It struck me there's something about intergenerational fairness here. This is the first time the baby boomers, those born, up to 1964, have had something taken off them to make space for the next generation. And when you look at the younger generation, which is kind of, I think, typified in the ranks of the new parliament, it's a much younger parliament, that kind of intergenerational unfairness about property, about being able to buy your own property, stand on your own 2 feet, move out of a home, that has to be addressed.
Is it the start of things to come? Do you think that that's going to be a theme of your government?
Maybe it isn't. It just struck me that how symbolic this step is. And as Eric Pickles said, why should the king get £200, or the lord, or many who can afford it? Something, yes, 2 million pensioners will lose out, but 900,000 of these are people who aren't enrolled on pension credit and could be on pension credit. So half the people are losing out. if they're onboarded, and I admit there may be some difficulty with that,
okay.
would then become eligible.
Don't lose the point.
Go on.
That, I mean, if you're on a state pension and pensioner credit, you're still on for a low income.
Yes.
The point that I was making is that there are significant numbers of, we know there are significant numbers of people in poverty who don't claim pensioner credit. There have been genuine and substantial attempts to get people to go on to pension credit, and we failed. And the advice that we received, and I can't believe the advice is difficult, is if you take away that winter fuel allowance, you are actually going to hit a lot of people who are very close to the poverty line, if not beyond it.
Well, that's the
and that
point
was
of
the
Martin
reason
Lewis
why
is
it
making.
wasn't done, because it just makes
But
it
might
makes
it also not have
it
the-
makes perfect sense logically. It makes perfect sense to do it, but the practicalities of it makes it difficult.
Final word, Kat.
But might it not also have the sort of incentivising factor of getting more of those people onto pension credit in the first place, when then they will be able to claim for that?
Come on, now let's be realistic. If you claim pension credit, you get far more sum in than you do if you get the winter fuel allowance. You will get far more that way. You will get far more to do that, and there are a significant number of people who don't claim it. That's a reality.
Well, you can see it's going to be a sparky panel this evening. We're already talking about the big issues such as intergenerational unfairness, clarity during a general election about what you're going to do, and means testing pensions. And it's only 8:16. If you want to get your call into our cross-question panel, you know what to do. 0345 6060 Text 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. You're listening to and watching Cross-Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale, 8:16.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
You're listening to and watching Cross Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dell. It's 8:18 on LBC. And I'm joined by Lord Pickles, Kat Neilan, Linda Yueh, and also by Torcuil Crichton. And our next question is from Oscar in Finchley. Why has this government completely abandoned Israel? Just to give a bit of context here, the Daily Telegraph reports that new limitations on exporting weapons to Israel could be introduced as soon as tomorrow. It follows the announcement that the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has recommended the government's funding of UNRWA, the UN's refugee agency in Palestine, also should have its funding restored, and also the fact that they are looking at this arrest warrant that was these proceedings in the International Court of Justice. Also, they're not going to stand in the way and actually object to those either. Lord Pickles.
Well, I think the decision on UNRWA was a surprising one and a worrying one. I understand we need to get aid in, we need to get more aid in, but UNRWA has a symbiotic relationship with Hamas. Quite a number of the tunnels were under and were buildings. Quite a number of the people involved were operatives. Now, I think I could have lived with this if we'd laid down some conditions to ensure that aid wasn't being siphoned off to Hamas, that money was not being siphoned off to Hamas. I mean, one of the great worries is that direct money is paid in dollars, and then that has to be exchanged for shekels. The only people that are doing exchange of foreign currency is Hamas. They take a 20% cut of that. Quite a lot of those billion-pound tunnels have been paid for directly through aid. And what I think we would have wanted to see would have been some assurances from UNRWA that the aid was going to go directly to the Palestinian people. They weren't going to use Hamas as the distributor of the aid, and there was some assurance in terms of ensuring that UNRWA property would be free from Hamas armaments.
But do you not think that it's perfectly justifiable for a new Labour government to change the tone with respect to Britain's relationship with Israel if they feel that the manner in which Israel's prosecuting this war is simply costing too many lives?
Well, I think yes, it is reasonable for the government to do that, but I don't think it was a binary choice. I think it would have been possible to look towards UNRWA taking up the position if certain safeguards have been put in. So at the moment, we have a position where there is no certainty that aid is going to go through. There are a number of other aid agencies on the ground.
Yeah, but this is about the weapons. This is about potentially reducing...
Sorry, you asked me about weapons. I mean, in terms of our export, it's tiny. It's an insignificant amount. We're a net exporter.
So it's just symbolic?
It would be a symbolic gesture.
The symbols matter sometimes?
The symbols, of course, do matter. But it does seem to me this is our ally, and we should support our ally when it's engaged in a war against a bunch of monsters who are deliberately putting as many civilians in the way of attack. They're using human shields to protect their infrastructure. They could have used the tunnels to protect the civilians, but they chose not to.
Okay, but even when the International Court of Justice says that the settlements in the West Bank are illegal?
What's that got to do with supplying aid to allow an export?
Quite a lot.
I don't think it has anything to do with it.
Doesn't it?
I don't think so. You remember the Oslo Accords? The Oslo Accords clearly laid down the possibility of land swaps, but there's going to be no peace, no two-state solution, which I support, until Israel can be absolutely certain that on a cold dawn morning, that people are not going to come out of them to murder, to rape, to mutilate.
Of course, understood. Neilan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have seen a big change. One of the first phone calls that Keir Starmer had early on was with Benjamin Netanyahu, and he talked very much about a sort of... it was clear there was quite a robust exchange within that phone call. The readout was quite different to the sort of nature of readouts that you normally get. And, of course, his choice of Attorney General, Richard Hermer, kind of gave a signal, an indication that perhaps this weapons ban might be kind of in the offing. But even before the election, there was a kind of change, a cross-party consensus around things like UNRWA because of the pressing need to get aid into Gaza and the fact that there was this kind of looming fear of famine and drought and so on, and people dying because there was not enough aid. I totally understand what Lord Pickles is saying about some of these parameters around how it then gets through, but we know that there is an urgency here, and perhaps that might be what is driving the kind of need to get.
Well, UNRWA is saying there's basically been a famine and that the lorries can't get through. They've been stuck at the border for weeks on end, at least in the early part of it. And this organisation, they would argue, has been targeted unfairly, that the money was taken away because of this investigation about the impropriety of some of the members of its organisation. Linda, you?
I think this is... I agree, actually, with Kat was just saying. I think because of Keir Starmer's own background as a human rights lawyer, his choice of Attorney General, for instance, not having Emily Thornberry continue in the role, suggests that there is, I think, he's trying to strike that very difficult balance of supportive but wanting to see aid go through, wanting to see a push for a ceasefire and ideally a two-state solution. I think his robustness is also a reflection of how long this conflict has gone on, the loss of lives. The Israelis, of course, are in a very challenging position, but I think the idea of the humanitarian aid, I think a solution has to be found. If you recall, previous ceasefires were actually around getting aid into these areas.
Isn't it also about the fact that 5 independent MPs have been elected to Parliament on the back of standing standing on the Gaza issue, and these were former Labour seats?
I think that's more of a question for Kat.
Actually, it might be more of a question for Torcuil. Go on, Torcuil. Perfect segue.
Well, yeah. First of all, let me start where Eric Pickles ended, which is the end point is that we want peace and a two-state solution for the hostages to be released, for the rockets to stop, for children in Gaza to stop starving. So we await what the Foreign Secretary, what David Lammy will say over the next few days. But if there is an arms export ban on Israel, that, yes, it is symbolic, but it is important too. It's an important position to take. And I've got to say, Scottish Labour were slightly ahead of UK Labour on that, and as Sarwar came out quite early on to say there should be a ban on arms exports.
But it's symbolic, though. I mean, Eric Pickles is saying that it's our arms exports don't amount to very much. Yeah. What's the point?
That's the symbolic part. The practical part then is when it comes to getting aid back in, and trying to use every means possible to get aid back in, so that starvation, so that famine isn't used as a weapon by either side, either by the occupying force or by the Hamas who put people in that situation in the first place. So,
what do you make of the decision by David Lammy and the government not to stand in the way or make objections to the prosecutor at the International Court of Justice for this arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu? Not just him, but also Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Daif as well.
Benjamin Netanyahu is now beginning to feel the heat around the table.
Wasn't feeling the heat in the Congress the other week.
No, but he is certainly feeling it in Europe and in parts of the US as well. And, the solution comes when the fighting stops, when the hostages are released, when the warmongers are replaced by peacemongers. And that means Hamas and Netanyahu must step aside and peacemakers must get into the room in order to deliver what we all want, a two-state solution.
If a Labour government is not standing in the way of the International Court of Justice arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, if he lands here for some reason, will he be arrested?
I'm guessing that the international law will be carried out. The UK signs up to that.
Oh no, we're a long way from all that. What this was about Britain being given permission by the International Court to put a case as to why or not they shouldn't, and they simply decided not to do that. Germany has objected, has put in evidence, and that argument will flow. And we are probably years away from the prospect of Mr. Netanyahu not feeling safe to come into London. But again, it's a symbolic thing. And what it effectively says, in an area in which we had quite a lot of influence in Israel and in the Gulf states, that influence is just simply going to be diminished. But could you just make one point? You talked about Envoy being miscreants. Let's be clear what happened. Employees of Envoy went on that raid on the 7th.
Can I just ask you, has that now been proved?
Yes, it has been now proved. And Envoy's accepted it. And it has also been accepted that hostages were kept in employees of Envoy's house and in schools to Envoy. So I think we need to kind of understand the reality. And the reality is, in terms of getting the aid, I've been at the crossing, I've seen this happen, where the aid comes in, it's almost like a fort. Lorries come in, doors are locked, people come in from the other side. And one of the reasons why the aid's not been getting through has been because of the hijacking of aid by Hamas. So the lorry drivers are reluctant to go in. Now, that's not going to change.
OK, thank you very much, Lord Pickles. The King and Queen, just on this sad events in Southport, the King has said that he and the Queen are profoundly shocked by the utterly horrific knife attack which killed 2 children in Southport. He said, "My wife and I have been profoundly shocked to hear of the utterly horrific incident in Southport today. We send our most heartfelt condolences, prayers and deepest sympathies to the families and loved ones, to those who have so tragically lost their lives, and to all of those affected by this truly appalling attack." Linda, your thoughts?
I would just echo what the King has said. I think to have a knife incident of this ferocity and then the tragedy that's come on the back of it, I think not only does it need to be investigated, I think the community and I think all of us should sit back and reflect and learn more about how this could have happened, what could have been done to prevent it. But beyond just the actual physical measures, what is it about? Is it systemic in terms of this young person? What access to knives? I think we just need to have a much deeper reflection on it.
Kathleen.
I think when events like this happen, my reaction becomes much less journalistic and much more personal, and my heart absolutely goes out to...
2 kids yourself?
I do have 2 kids, and I called my husband on the way here, which I don't normally do of an evening, just to sort of say, are they okay? How was their day? It's very hard, and my heart just absolutely goes out to all of the people affected, the families, the community. It must be absolutely appalling. They must feel as though something has been ripped out of their souls.
Absolutely, Torcuil.
Yeah, it's tough. Your condolences go out to the families affected. In fact, not just to the families affected, because the whole community will be traumatised by this. It takes you right by it. Echoes, although obviously it's not severe, it echoes of Dunblane in 1986.
I remember it distinctly.
I remember that day quite clearly as well. And everybody in Scotland remembers that day. Not just the Dunblane community, which has been deeply affected ever since. And it took like 10 years almost to get the Cullen report, which kind of banned kind of weapons, handguns, and fortunately, you can almost say, although knife crime is a huge, even Home Office questions this afternoon. There were several questions on knife crime in London, where it's
an epidemic.
The knife crime is, but fortunately, incidents like this are rare in Britain.
Still, Pickles.
Yeah, I agree. They are right, and I think it's really important we don't get ahead of ourselves on this. We don't have the details. We don't know what happened. What we do know is, that parents have been mourning the death of a child, and that is a terrible thing.
2 children.
Southport is a wonderful community. It was a place of many happy childhood holidays I had as a young kid, and I'm grief-stricken for them. And I hope that we know what's happened reasonably soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We all are. Thank you for that. You're listening to and watching Cross Question with my panel. If you want to get a question in, you know what to do. 0345 6060973. Text 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. 8:32. The news headlines now with Daryl Jackson.
2 children have been killed and another 9 injured in a multiple stabbing on Merseyside. 6 are in a critical condition after the attack at a Taylor Swift event in Southport. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has been charged with making indecent images of children. He was arrested in November and is due to appear in court on Wednesday. And the Chancellor has suggested she could be forced to increase tax in her first budget to address a £22 billion hole in public finances. Rachel Reeves also announced plans to scrap winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners. LBC weather: patchy rain clearing in western Scotland tonight, the odd shower lingering in the far north, and a low of 10 degrees.
This is LBC.
claims.
Cross Question on LBC.
Cross Question on LBC with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dell. It's 8:35. I'm joined by a stellar panel this evening. And joining me from my left is Torcuil Crichton, the Labour MP for h-Eileanan.
Do you want me to say it?
Go on, you do.
h-Eileanan.
Okay, I'll do it. h-Eileanan.
There you are, perfect.
Not bad.
The Western
not bad.
Isles.
Thank you so much. So Torcuil, tell me, you started your career as a journalist, but you also made a film about Donald Trump's mother's voyage from the Isle of Lewis to America.
Gosh, you've been doing your research, haven't you? Yeah.
Well, you like to come prepared. Go on.
Yeah,
Tell us
I
about it
did,
briefly.
because Donald John's mother, Donald Trump's mum, came from the village of Tongue in the Isle of Lewis, Mary Ann MacLeod, and that's the same village my mother was born in. So when Donald John became famous, I decided to make a movie about him, but it was... If it had been up to me, of course, I would have made a movie all about Donald Trump. But we managed to get this amazing correspondence between the young Mary Ann MacLeod and her pen pal in Dundee, who were girls the same age.
Yeah.
And we found these amazing series of black and white photos which showed the girl on the Croft in the Hebrides, the very young woman, confident woman on the boat rail going across the Atlantic, and then in upstate New York in her bikini and go over. It was the immigrants, 20th century immigrant story, and of course it's the story Donald Trump cannot tell. He's the immigrant's son.
Indeed, thank you very much indeed for that. Also joining me is Linda Yueh, economist based at University of Oxford. Unfortunately, Linda, your parents must be slightly disappointed in you because you're a bit of an academic underachiever. You've got a BA from Yale University, a Master of Public Policy from Harvard University, a JD, which is a law degree from New York University School of Law, and a DPhil, your PhD, in economics, and an MA from St Edmund Hall, Oxford. I mean, do you want my mum to tell me that I'm a complete failure or something? Also, you began your career in law and then migrated to economics. How? Why?
I got tired of the lawyer jokes. So, there's a famous one, which is, what is the difference between a dead lawyer and a dead skunk on the road?
Yes.
There's skid marks around the skunk.
Superb. Kat Neilan, political editor of Tortoise Media, also here. Kat, you like to do long-distance running. Are you doing much of it?
I haven't done much of it since having kids. I did do 3 different marathons.
Well.
Sadly, have never got into London, although I do apply every year. And I heard about a month ago that I hadn't got in this year, which is kind of a routine that I go through of applying, feeling really excited, go for a long run and think, oh my God, what have I done?
Yep.
And then quite relieved when I never get in.
And Lord Eric Pickles, Conservative peer and former Cabinet Minister, Special Envoy for the UK for post-Holocaust issues, and also a flag-waving enthusiast. When you were at the Department of Communities and Local Government, you were a real fan of flying English country flags on the local government department. Why?
Not a word of truth in this. It's something that's going to grow up. I got really hacked off with the National Front hijacking our flag.
It's an interesting point. Yeah.
So what I did, I liberalised the way in which you could fly the flag, and I encouraged that to happen. But people misunderstood it. So I keep getting gifts of flags. I've been to places. I had a wonderful time in the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
And they were going to present me with this enormous bloody flag. And I kept saying, no, it's personal. Keep it here.
But it's a very interesting point you make about reclaiming the flag. Very interesting. Now, our next caller is Martin in Doncaster. Good evening, Martin. What would you like to ask?
Hello, Ali and panel. Why did the Dutch selectors and IOC allow a child rapist to compete at the Olympics? And should we expect Olympians to be role models, or are they mostly just people doing a job?
Thank you very much, Martin. Just a bit of background for the listeners. Dutch beach volleyball player Steven van der Velde was booed when he played in Paris on Sunday. In 2014, the then 19-year-old van der Velde travelled to the UK and raped a 12-year-old girl in Milton Keynes after grooming her online. He was jailed for 4 years in 2016 and ended up serving 13 months in prisons in the UK and the Netherlands. Kat.
Yeah, I think it's appalling. I was really astounded when I heard about this, and compare and contrast it with the fate of the horse rider, the British horse rider who was banned after she was found to have whipped her horse. You can see two very different responses to incidents there. I mean, it is quite unfathomable that this man has been allowed to compete. Except what I would say is, when we see the sort of repeated pattern of male sports people, celebrities of various kinds, having been accused of rape and so on, and then being allowed to continue to perform for their team or their band or whatever it is, there is a pattern here in which there are people sort of turn a blind eye to certain behaviour. Now, I think this is probably a very extreme version of that. I don't think I've ever heard of anything this level, but there is definitely a sort of sense in which some people are comfortable with levels of misdemeanour that I don't think is right. But
Kat, is that fair? Because clearly the misdemeanour, as you put it, was absolutely appalling. Raping a 12-year-old girl, absolutely heinous.
Yeah.
He's committed a crime. He's paid the price for it. Charlotte Dujardin, the case that you make with the whipping of the horse, which was absolutely appalling video, no price has been paid other than she's had to be not attending the Olympics. So when it comes to this case, he's done a crime, he's paid the price. Should he then not be allowed to move on with his life?
Well, clearly that's the decision that the Dutch team has
But it's not
made.
Something that you...
It's not something I would necessarily endorse, and clearly by the fact that he was being booed...
Indeed.
It's not a decision that people support in the Olympics stadium either.
Linda.
I'm going to pick up on the second part of the question as well, which is, do we expect Olympians to be role models? And I think we do. I think we do. People who represent the highest level of sport, they are role models, whether sometimes they want to be or not. So sometimes they try too hard to be role models, let me be very clear. But by their behavior, by their ethics, they are setting an example, especially for young people. So I think we do expect Olympians, athletes, people who we applaud when they win for our country. There is something different about their space.
Is that fair, though, Linda, that we expect that of them? I mean, they are sports people. They're not meant to be paragons of virtue. Do we impose too high a burden of expectation upon them?
I was actually I was debating whether I should raise this, because I know how football can be if I mention England.
You can.
Okay.
Go on.
So Gareth Southgate, the former England manager, wrote a very well-known letter.
Yeah, the letter to the
letter, which became the basis of a play by the playwright James Graham, which is now actually back at the National Theatre. And I think he, in this letter, makes some very nuanced remarks around just that. They may be too much is projected of them. For them individually, they have a sense of the kind of role model that they wish to be. But I think for us, sitting back, whether they wish to or not, their behavior, especially looking at this case, that's not okay behavior. And I think that's where the role modeling and the decision around it, I think, is, in this case, not just controversial. I think it needs to be discussed and debated.
Torcuil Crichton.
Yeah, football is an interesting parallel, because there have been similar cases of footballers who've been found guilty or accused of sexual offences who've then found it very difficult. They may have done the crime and served the time legally, but in the court of public opinion and in the eyes of the public, who do hold these people to a higher standard. They are our Athenian gods, our superheroes. There really is no way back.
But let me ask you, though, if this was someone who was, I don't know, a plumber or a carpenter or a banker or something, if they needed to earn a living somehow, if they've committed a crime, however horrendous the crime is, they serve their time, they should be allowed to rebuild their lives. That is how the criminal justice system works. Why, in this particular case, should a beach volleyball player, if they want to play beach volleyball, presumably he earns a living from this, I have no idea, why should they not be allowed to earn their trade?
In ordinary life, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future, and people can be forgiven for crimes and misdemeanors. But when they're on this scale,
public figures,
and when they are public figures, and when they are held in higher regard, and I think quite rightly to higher standard, then the court of public opinion just doesn't accept it.
Interesting.
I don't think we should mistake the criminal justice system with sport. I think that would be a considerable mistake, and I'm all for the process of redemption, and people you made a mistake while young. But I think the line is this: This guy's representing his country. So it's not about him setting an example. It's what his country says about him. And I think he may well be full of repentance. He may well regret it. He may well have changed life. But I think there are certain things that you do in life that disqualify you
from representing your
country.
It's an interesting one. Martin, what do you make of this in Doncaster?
Well,
Martin?
Eric's just,
Go on.
I totally agree with what Eric's just, Eric Pickles just said. It's on a world stage. And what if that person, or the crime's been committed on, is wanting to watch the Olympics, and then they see this person on telly, and the heart goes out to the victim.
Yeah.
I agree with there's certain cases, and people will accept, but sexual offences it's another level. I
think it's an interesting point.
Even in prison, it's another level.
I think it's an interesting point, Martin, particularly when you make when you're representing your country in the Olympics, which is the biggest sporting stage in the world. Some people would argue that it is different, and even if you've repented and you've done your time and paid the price for it, it is slightly different representing your country in this context. A fascinating discussion so far. Still got about 15 minutes to go. If you want to get a question into our panel on cross-question this evening, 0345 606 0973, text 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. You're watching and listening to Cross-Question on LBC with me, Ali Miraj, in for Ian Dale, 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Ali Miraj on LBC, in for Ian Dale with Cross Question, 8:48, joined by my panel. The next question we have is this, and by the way, if you want to get your questions in still time, 0345 606 0973, text 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. A text question from Barbara in Lincolnshire. If the Conservative Party doesn't want Suella Braverman to have a place in its leadership battle, should she just up sticks and defect to Reform now? Bit of background on this. The former Home Secretary says she did have the required 10 nominations to put her onto the ballot paper for this context, but she says most Tory MPs disagree with her diagnosis and prescription about why the party was crushed at the election and how it should respond, adding that she has been branded mad, bad and dangerous in response to her arguments about immigration, high taxes and what she calls transgender ideology. Not very nice, Linda, you?
No, but I suppose I just realised this is actually a Labour term, isn't it? That the party is a broad church. So
I think both parties use it. Usually to paper over the cracks.
So whether or not she wants to join Reform, leave the Tories, I think, within the Conservatives, there's going to be a range of views. And if she did have 10 nominators, then she does have 10 colleagues who would support her to be leader. And I think a party, probably does have space for a wide range of views. Now, whether or not they want that person to be the next Tory leader is, of course, an entirely different question.
But only just isn't she just putting herself out of her own misery? Because even if she got 10 nominations, I mean, why put yourself through the embarrassment of a 3-month leadership election campaign, only to be humiliated?
A question which is valid for all of the candidates.
Go on, Torcuil, go on.
Well, I mean, mad, bad and dangerous to know. I mean, I knew Lord Byron. She's no Lord Byron. She's a coward. She's got. I could have been a contender. I could have got the 10. She's not doing it because she knows she would crash and burn. And because of that divide, that is in with the right in politics now within the Conservative Party, that they don't know whether to hug reform, embrace reform, or be swallowed by reform. They're just quite not sure where they want to be and what they want to do. And it's quite a dangerous moment, not just for the Conservative Party, but for British politics as well, because that veer to the right will pull plenty of people with it. We've seen populist nationalism before. We know what populist nationalism is. We've seen it in action in Scotland for a long time. It generally doesn't end very well. It didn't end up with very good governance where we are, and it wouldn't end up with very good governance across the UK either.
But Torcuil, let me just pick you up on this, because you talk about populist nationalism. A lot of people would say, well, populist nationalism includes actually reducing immigration numbers, which the successive Conservative governments, since David Cameron said that they would do, to reduce it to the tens of thousands, was never delivered on. And that's why 4 million people voted for reform. And Suella Braverman was one of the ones actually within the Tory party warning that this would happen, potentially.
Yeah, and we need proper solutions to immigration. We also need to recognise and have a proper grown-up debate on immigration to recognise that Europe is getting older, paler, and has a demographic imbalance, which I see in the Western Isles. I'm seeing over the next couple of years a 20% increase in older people, a donut-shaped hole where working people are, and fewer young people. In parts of the UK, we need immigration. We need a lot of immigration. Other parts, crowded southeast, I accept it. But we need to have a real conversation on that, and not just a conversation about barring the door.
Okay, shouldn't she have been allowed to stand? Oh, well, she's removed herself. But in a way, in the same way that Jeremy Corbyn was as the joke candidate who ended up winning.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn hardly reached the threshold of 35. He was loaned some votes, and then bada boom.
Well, there you go.
And the lesson for the Conservative Party in that, of course, is that Labour went out of power for a very, very long time.
Lord Pickles?
Well, I'm a great fan of LBJ. And one of the things he said, if you want to understand politics, you've got to be able to count. And I think it's demonstrated that Suella knows how to count, because I don't think she was going to make it. And I've never understood. I've always found Suella an immensely charming person in private, very caring, very nice person. And I don't know why she puts out these fiery statements. I don't think she'd be a natural fit for reform. I'm sure she'll stay with the Conservative Party. But I was one of the people that said they had to go along. And the reason why I felt that the decision shouldn't have been made until after the party conference is, none of the people standing have any experience of leading a party in opposition.
That's very good.
And I think we actually need to see them earn their spurs. They've been distinguished members of the cabinet, and they've done a great job, I'm sure. But they've never faced what it's like being on the benches, particularly with an overwhelming majority. So I really want to see them move forward.
More fundamentally, have any of them, in your view, Lord Pickles, and you've been in politics a very long time, you were even a local councillor back in the day, you've got a lot of experience, have any of them actually diagnosed the fundamental problem of why the Tories lost the election?
Not yet.
Well, they've got to, haven't they?
Not yet. And I think it's probably unreasonable to expect them to have diagnosed it. And the reason we lost is because the electorate went to the ballot box from all over the country with a big intention of actually getting rid of the Conservative government.
Absolutely.
And they did that because of a lack of delivery and a lack of understanding of what the Conservative Party stands for.
Indeed.
And we allowed the middle to be swallowed by Labour and the Lib Dems.
We should watch it with great interest. Kat?
I think the short answer to why Suella Braverman isn't going to defect to Reform is because she may still harbour, as I think probably a lot of people deep within do, desires to become the leader of the Conservative Party eventually, if not now, maybe later. And she's not going to be able to do that if she's in Reform. She will never be a Prime Minister if she's a Reform MP, but she could potentially be Prime Minister.
You think she's playing the long game?
Well, I think, you never underestimate the sort of long game when it comes to politics. But I think within the party itself, there is a sense of relief from some people that she isn't standing, because to take Torquil's example about Corbyn, she would have been the sort of Corbynite equivalent. Yeah. That kind of leaves some of the right, some of whom her former supporters had already come out and said they were going to back people like Robert Jenrick. Yeah. And that really was kind of the death knell for her campaign.
So we've heard it here first, that she's going to stand off the Tories lose the next election, whenever that is, 2029. Text question from Ellie in Southwark. The government has rejected Spanish Prime Minister's idea of bringing back free movement for 18 to 30-year-olds between the two countries to give young people some freedoms back after the harms of Brexit. When will Starmer get real about Brexit? Now, just a bit of background. Pedro Sanchez has suggested this idea, similar to the ones that the UK has with 13 countries, including Australia, New Zealand and Canada at present, to Sir Keir Starmer, but a spokesman for the government says it is not considering a youth mobility scheme. Torcuil Crichton, why?
It is considering a music mobility scheme, thank goodness, to allow creatives and musicians to cross borders in a way that Brexit stopped them from. So we're going to have that culture.
That's house music. Go on.
And I think the government should be open. I certainly would be open to allowing that Rob generation. We talked about at the beginning of this programme about generational unfairness. Our generation was able to cross Europe on a bus ticket, mostly, as proof of identity, and the younger people now have to provide passport and other details and have difficulty studying abroad. So I think it's something that Labour should consider. Again, if we have a grown-up conversation about what we need in terms of demographics, in terms of population, in terms of immigration, I think that's a conclusion we'll reach.
Linda, you've studied in the US and in the UK. You've clearly benefited greatly from it. How important do you think this is, and why do you think the Labour government's not entertaining the Spanish Prime Minister's proposal?
I would agree with what Torcuil said. I think because I have benefited from it, I think it is actually, important to think about why the UK has it with some countries, but why. My guess, and this is purely a guess, is if the Spanish Prime Minister has proposed it, it might then have to be applicable to all the countries in the EU because of...
That's absolutely right.
I'll be a bit... Lord Pickles, go on.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I can't understand why we got into this discussion, because you can't do... Spain couldn't do that without the rest of the EU. I wouldn't be opposed
to the
idea. It would be nice if we could move through passports pretty easily. And if you look as you arrive at Heathrow, if you're from the EU or from other countries, you can go straight through. That doesn't apply if you go into France. Strangely, it does if you are going to Italy. But these are things that we could take care of, and frankly, I think we should.
I think there's some buyer's regret from some people within the Tory party on parts of Brexit. Kat?
Yeah, I think I kind of go back, I guess, to my original point about the way in which the election campaign was fought by Labour, which was very cautious, very worried about any kind of attacks and the kind of Ming Vase strategy, which is, I think they are still concerned about the B word. We don't hear it. Even today when we're talking about, the spending black hole, we don't talk about, the EU sort of trade deals and so on that could perhaps help boost growth. And I know that there are several people within Labour who would like to see not just the music agreement that Torcuil mentions, which I'm afraid some of his colleagues have slightly diminished as being something for people with ukuleles, and something a bit more sort of, broad, wholesome. And we have the Turin scheme, which is a successful thing. So why are we so nervous about bringing that out over...
Very briefly, your Pickles.
If that buyer's regret was a reference to me regarding breakfast.
No. Generally.
I voted to stay in.
Generally. Not you. But I think a lot of people...
Just wanted to be clear.
No, very good.
Sometimes you can be a bit touchy.
Thank you, Lord Pickles, putting us absolutely in no doubt which way you voted. Now, my fun question for the evening always instills fear in the hearts of every self-respected panellist. From Nathan in Ipswich, a miniature model of one of the spaceships which helped Luke Skywalker destroy the Death Star in the original Star Wars film, used for close-up shots in the film, has been sold at auction for more than £1.2 million. Not sure if Rishi Sunak bought that one. He's a big Star Wars fan. Which film prop would you take a money, no object approach to? Cat.
Why do you keep coming to me with the hard ones? I will have to go with the DeLorean from Back to the Future because
that's a good one.
Yeah, favourite film and very cool car.
Lord Pickles.
From the most magnificent film ever made, which is The Searchers, John Ford's Searchers. I would want John Wayne's repeating Winchester rifle.
Okay. Superb. Linda, you?
I want the replicator from Star Trek, where you just ask it and a food appears. I'm a terrible cook. I mean, I just hope he springs eternal. That might work one day.
It is a prop.
Well, no man of a certain age could refuse James Bond's Aston Martin DB5.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. That's a great one.
I would drive from London 800 miles to the Western Isles, then crash it into a sheep or a greer, I guess. It'd be nice to have it for a day.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to my really superb panel this evening. Torcuil Crichton, the Labour MP, Linda Yueh, the economist, Kat Dillon, political editor of Tortoise Media, and of course Lord Eric Pickles, Conservative peer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Coming up. Now, this is all very interesting because the government has now reached a deal with the leadership of the junior doctors. That is going to be put to junior doctors to see if it's going to pass or not. This deal is going to award a colossal 22% pay offer, but it has been regarded as simply not enough by some within the medical fraternity. This is going to be 22% offer. It's going to be given over 2 years. This debate and discussion has been going on for the best part of a year with these strikes going on. Finally, they have agreed on this particular proposal, which is good news if you want to actually go and get an appointment to see your doctor. But my question is this. Do you think it is fair or short-sighted?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation, this is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, 2 children have been killed and 9 injured in a multiple stabbing in Southport. 6 are in a critical condition, as are 2 adults.
As a mum and a nana, I can't begin to imagine the pain and suffering that the families of the victims are going through at this moment in time, and I wish to send my heartfelt condolences to them.
That's Merseyside Chief Constable Serena Kennedy. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has been speaking in the Commons this afternoon.
I have been in contact with the Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner and the Merseyside Mayor to convey my support to the police and our thanks to the police and emergency services.
No motive's been established, but the stabbings aren't being treated as terror-related. Well, in the last half an hour, the King has sent his most heartfelt condolences, prayers and deepest sympathies to the families and loved ones of the victims of the utterly horrific Southport stabbings. Former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards has been charged with 3 counts of making indecent images of children. Police say they were created between December 2020 and April 2022 on WhatsApp. The 62-year-old, who was arrested last November, is due in court on Wednesday. The Chancellor's suggested there could be tax rises when the budget's held on the 30th of October. Rachel Reeves has been revealing how she intends to plug a £22 billion black hole in public finances inherited from the Tories. She was heckled in the Commons when she said winter fuel payments for some pensioners would be cut. Darren Jones, Labour's Chief Secretary to the Treasury, told LBC they're having to make tough choices.
We didn't want to cancel rail projects because they had no money behind them. You know, we didn't want to have to make the decision to means test winter fuel payments, but we have to, and we've got to be honest and upfront about that with the British people, because we have to fix these foundations if we're going to start to rebuild Britain.
Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will be joining Nick Ferrari tomorrow morning on LBC. And Team GB have added to their medal collection at the Paris Today they've taken gold in both the equestrian, eventing and the mountain biking cross-country. There's also silver for the diving, canoe slalom and men's freestyle swimming. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 6 points at 82.92. The pound buys $1.28 and €1.18. LBC weather, patchy rain clearing in western Scotland tonight. The odd shower lingering in the far north and a low of 10.